Right, guys, I'd like to address the stage one paper. First of all, let's think about where do you find this assignment? We'll make sure everyone's feeling confident about how you move around in the course. One, you could go to the syllabus over here on the left-hand side, and from here, go down to week 5, and stage 1, where you see write a 3-page thesis-driven research paper on African religious practices that survived the diaspora, as remembered by Equiano and as described by Chirot. Provide a works cited, font 11, spacing 1.5. This description is meant to dial you in on a very tight, equally weighted paper in which you're examining what we read in the interesting narrative with regard to African practices, and the phrase as remembered by Equiano means, what does Equiano write down and tell us about African religious practices? As remembered by, and then as described by Chirot. Chirot is not writing a memoir. Chirot is writing her history of slave religion, and she is drawing not from her memories, but rather from folklore as she has found it in oral, in written, in slave owners' records, in song. So she has pulled together, like a good historian, a picture of slave religion in the Americas, whereas Equiano has provided us with a narrative. As a strong reader of these texts, you're aware of that difference. This assignment is cluing you in to memoir and memories, and then the historical evidence that she's asked or provided. So when you design your outline for this paper, you would like to have roughly equivalent amounts of material so that you're giving each of these 2 references roughly equal time, and you're going to meet the requirements of the assignment that way. Now, the syllabus is one way to find the assignment. If we go back here to modules, and this is how I think about this course. Week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, here we are. What to do in week 5, so that, like walking into class, each week there is a module, and if you start in that module for the week, it will guide you to what you need to get done. And here we have it in bold red. Write a 3-page thesis-driven research paper on African religious practices that survived the diaspora, as remembered by Equiano and as described by Chirot. If you do not know at this point what the diaspora is, you will want to pursue a little research on that term. It comes from the term dispersion, and we studied, especially with the help of Soller's introduction to the Norton Critical Edition, we know about the roughly 11 million Africans who were transported across to slave economy cultures across the Americas. That is the diaspora, the dispersion. So, African religious practices that survive the diaspora. Now, as remembered by Equiano means go look at his memories, and as described by Chirot means pull the evidence from Chirot. Now, if I was you, I would start then by trying to mine everything I could out of chapter 1, the account of his country and their manners and customs. If you do this, you might find on page 26 a paragraph that says, as to religion, the natives believe that there is one creator of all things, and that he lives in the sun, and it is girded round with a belt that he may never eat or drink. But, according to some, he smokes a pipe, which is our own favorite luxury. They believe he governs events, especially our deaths or captivity. But as for the doctrine of eternity, I do not remember to have ever heard of it. Some, however, believe in the transmigration of souls in a certain degree. Now, you might zero in on that paragraph, but before and after this, Equiano's narrative is replete with references to cultural practices that we can say were used to orient the community toward an overarching monotheistic creator and a hierarchy of middle-range spirits and then ancestors to which people made daily oblations. Before he hits the paragraph on religion, he has already provided you with a lot of information about orientations and the orientations of the community towards what matters most. And he does not combine all of these pieces into one paragraph called religion, because religion was not understood as a distinct and separate thing that happened in one kind of building on one kind of day in a week. Rather, there are orientations to what is of most significance in the community, found in the food, found in the clothing, found in the dancing, found in the poetry, found in the military. So this is why this course is run with religion as orientation. And this is why we began with this book, that we get to move beyond the tight reading of what is religion to a broader reading of what it is in culture that orients people to a sense of their ultimate significance. We hear references to the ombrage and to circumcision, two ways that people actually mark their bodies. Such marks function as identifiable boundaries on the landscape of cultural meanings. So the more comprehensive paper will produce a description of orientation as described by Equiano, and will not simply contain itself to the religion paragraph. So when he says on page 22, we are almost a nation of dancers, musicians, and poets. Thus every great event, such as a triumphant return from battle or other cause of public rejoicing, is celebrated in public dances, which are accompanied with songs and music suited to the occasion. You can ask yourself about the moral universe that their rituals were creating. Because their moral universe included militaristic success, celebrations of the life cycle, accomplishments, birth, puberty, death. When you go from having mind from Equiano to Chirot, you have a greater challenge. But if you have mined carefully from Equiano, you're going to hear echoes, and you'll also once again be able to ask yourself, what are the orientations that the slave communities were developing? What moral universe were they creating, and where do I hear echoes from what Equiano remembered? And I want to point you to page 20 in our chapter, where she describes supernaturalism was thus an inseparable part of the composite of cultural practices that emerged in the context of the American slave experience. Supernaturalism here meaning that infused energetic sense of material objects as containing a kind of power. And we know with her definition of magic that we are talking about people who understand I can use my root work to actually impact, mechanically intervene and impact my world. That supernaturalism is an inseparable part of the composite of cultural practices. Can you find echoes from Equiano's description of the world in which he was a child with the idea of this kind of supernaturalism? She concludes that paragraph writing, "These supernatural traditions clearly served multiple purposes, but at the heart of conjuring practices lay a fundamental quest for power, explanation, and control." To what extent could one say you can find within Equiano's chapter a description of a people whose ritual celebrations marked their quest for power, explanation, and control in their world? The other thing I want to point you to, with an eye towards the larger paper, was that Shirot's next chapter is called Africa Was a Land of Magic Power Since the Beginning of History. Old World Sources of Conjuring Traditions. So you are free to move ahead in Shirot. I didn't assign that chapter. It would be a great idea to look at with an eye towards the final paper. It would be helpful for this version of the paper. But if you can, I think this is the real difference. And you'll see in the rubric that defining your terms is important. If you can mine that chapter 1 and 10, and mine the echoes that you see in the evidence provided by Shirot regarding an orientation to the world that is consistent with what an African traditional orientation was, then you've got a 3-page paper. It is tricky to define your terms, provide the evidence you want to bring from Equiano, provide the evidence you want to bring from Shirot, wrap it up with that concluding paragraph, hit it out of the park by restating what it is that you've managed to bring together uniquely. There's your paper. I think I've answered the questions I've received so far, and I hope that's been helpful.